Can we get a round of applause for Mark Scandrette?
So it's great to be here tonight. I see a few familiar faces. I actually got to participate, when was that? Last fall? We got to spend 8 sessions together working on some of the themes that I'm going to be talking about tonight. I lived in San Francisco with my family since 1998. Here's a picture of us shortly after we moved here. We relocated from the Midwest to the United States. Lisa and I have 3 kids, Haley, Noah, and Isaiah. And we bought a house in the Mission District, that's about 2 miles south of here, back in '98. And it's when the mission was the mission, is what I like to say. And things have changed a little bit since then. And it's gentrified a bit. Although I want to tell you tonight that there's still a lot of struggle in the neighborhood. This isn't the main theme of my talk, but I will mention a couple things about this. This is our family today, in the last year or 2, maybe 3 years. My wife Lisa's here tonight with a friend of ours, Missy, who is visiting. And Missy is one of the characters in my book, Free. So you have to pick up a copy and you'll find out where Missy is. Maybe let her sign your copy in chapter 1 where she's mentioned. We've had a lot of struggle down in the Mission over the last year or 2. Several people have been shot and killed by the police, and including my neighbor, Amilcar Perez Lopez, who on February 26th, there's a police narrative about this, but the neighbors know the true story of what happened, and so is the autopsy about the fact that he was shot 6 times in the back as he was fleeing the police. He was not an aggressor. You can read about it in The Guardian, in the SF Weekly, in all the newspapers. It's been covered by 7 different news outlets. I'm working on a campaign to see that justice is done, that we really find out what actually happened instead of things being covered up. It's created a lot of distrust, especially for immigrant residents of San Francisco and many people who have had bad experiences with the police. So we just want to find out what really happened. There's a petition back here, and if you're a California resident, I'm going to ask for some help tonight to just sign that to say we want to see the district attorney and the California Attorney General actually investigate what happened to my neighbor, Amilcar Perez Lopez, just a 20-year-old young man who was supporting his family. If you go to a link that's on my Facebook page, you can find out more about this situation. There's a 5-minute video there. But hopefully, take a look over there. So I run an organization here in San Francisco called Reimagine. And we are interested in helping one another close the gap between how we want to live and how we actually live. Jesus came offering a whole new way of life, a new way to be human that he invites us into. And it requires us to cooperate with the work of God in our lives. Part of what inspired us to do this work is so many people when I moved to this city, if they found out that I was a Christian or that I had worked as a pastor, I got an earful and none of it was positive, okay? And it broke my heart, and I realized maybe maybe I and those like me have missed it. That we've learned to believe in Jesus, but maybe it's been harder for us to learn to actually become his followers. And so that's probably my deep, lifelong passion and what motivates me. My family and my friends, another thing that they know about me is that I have a superpower. It's a little bit embarrassing, this superpower, but it is that I find things almost everywhere I go. I have found hundreds and thousands of dollars on the sidewalk. Most of the clothes that our family wears, I found on the sidewalk. All the clothes I'm wearing, except for my underwear, I found on the sidewalk. I went on a run this afternoon, and I found this really awesome sweatshirt. It's made by Threads for Thought. Sustainable apparel, so it's not only a sidewalk find, but it is also green and organic and sustainable. I looked it up online when I got home, and they sell these at Nordstrom's. So I'm wondering if there's anybody who is a size small and could use a sweatshirt. Okay, it could fit a medium. Okay, I see that hand. It goes to you. I've sniffed it, and it's pretty clean. I would wear it, but some people like to wash things first. I don't quite understand. So, one of the things that I've been interested in, that our organization's been interested in, is how the life and teachings of Jesus connect with two very important dimensions of our lives. One is time and one is money. And we can see from the Gospels that Jesus said some very curious things about time and money. One of the more compelling things that Jesus said was, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Wait a second. He said that to a rich young man. He's not talking to you and me here. Well, actually, I'm quoting Luke 12, where as a general instruction to disciples, Jesus says, if you want to be one of my followers, try this on. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Did he really mean that? Or is it possible that he just meant in my heart, in a special little spot? If I was asked, I would be willing to sell possessions and give to the poor. Well, the earliest disciples of Jesus apparently thought he was actually serious about this, because in the book of Acts it says, selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone who had need. Years ago, I got together a group of friends and we started looking at this passage, and we're like, what if we had the courage to do this? And a group of us organized how we would sell or give away half of our possessions over an 8-week period of time. But one of the big questions that came up for us was, why did Jesus say this? Was this a rule, like a hard thing, that he would give this to us as like a test? Or did Jesus know something or believe something different about life than I tend to? And it really gets to the question, do we believe that we live in a world of scarcity or abundance? If we live in a world of scarcity, then it means that I need to collect as much as possible. And actually, we're in competition with each other, and I need to hold it so that you don't get it. And I need to hoard and save. But if we live in a world of abundance, then it means that you and I can be grateful, trusting, generous, content, and open-handed, becoming part of the new community of giving and receiving that Jesus described as the kingdom of God. So the folks in our group, as we were working through this, a lot of things came up for us as we were trying to sell or give away half of our possessions. One thing is, we found out most of our stuff, even when we tried to sell it, even though we thought it was so precious, nobody really wanted it. But the other part was, it started to expose things, wounds that we had in our lives. And I want to mention some of those to you tonight. For a lot of us, and maybe this is true for many of us in this room tonight, a lot of us experience a money ache. The numbers aren't adding up. The expenses and the resources to pay those expenses are not even. And so that can create a lot of tension and anxiety. Sometimes we end up upside down in our finances. Many people have experienced financial setbacks, medical bills, a lost job. Some of us have regrets about choices we made with money that have put us in a difficult situation in the present moment. And what we discovered is, if we had the courage to talk honestly with each other about those money aches, we could actually support and help each other take new steps in our lives. And in our group, sometimes that meant things like somebody saying, hey, you've made some choices that put you in a lot of credit card debt. I did that same thing, but I've learned some tools to help me make some new choices, and I'd be happy to walk alongside of you and be your buddy to help you with that. At other times, it's been like, hey, you don't have enough to pay rent. Our group here is going to help you pay your rent, or we're going to pay some of those medical bills for you and be that new kind of community. I want to suggest that for those of us who experience pain or regret in our financial lives, it's never too early and it's never too late to take a new step, to be vulnerable and authentic with your community, and to open this part of your life up to talk about it honestly with your Creator as well. So we feel that's, I think, especially in San Francisco. I know not everybody here is from San Francisco, but I looked this up not too long ago, that the average rent right now in San Francisco for a 10-mile radius of here is $3,803 a month, right? So maybe for you that's not a big deal. For some of us that seems like a lot of money to pay in rent. Median home price is $1 million. Median income, $75,604. We were meeting to talk about matters of his soul, and somehow something about how much he made a year came up, and I was like, you make like $20,000 more a year than I do, and I'm 15 years older than you, and I'm raising 3 kids. What? And what he said to me really surprised me and stuck with me. He said, yes, Mark, that is true, but you do something with your time that's deeply meaningful to you. And I go to a job every day that doesn't feel that meaningful to me. Now, sometimes we need to work on finding the meaning of the work that we're presently doing because we can't get out of it. But other times, people have opportunities to make choices and trade-offs to say, I'm going to do something meaningful with my time that might not bring as much income. There's a bunch of YWAMers in the room, and a lot of you've done this. And I think that it's helpful to remember that you've made some choices that are a trade-off. And what that means is you get to be doing meaningful things with your time. And that's something to celebrate. That's something that you're rich in, even if you're not rich in dollars. You feel me on this? Does that make sense? There's more. What if we measured wealth, not just in terms of material possessions and finances, but more holistically? And included things like meaningful work, deep relationships, and appreciation for the simple pleasures of life that are available to all people on the planet. If we measured wealth in those terms, then it means that some people that would be considered the poorest people in the world are actually very rich in life and in their relationships and with God. And some of us who live on this part of the planet, who have a lot of material resources, are actually experiencing a real poverty. So many people are surprised when they go to the developing world. And of course, it's heartbreaking to see people struggling with access to basic nutrition, clean water, and public safety. But what is the most surprising thing to the most people is how happy people are. And this does not negate the struggle, but what it suggests is that human flourishing is not just a matter of finances. You feel me, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, a third ache that let's say that money's good for me. Let's say that I'm good with money. I'm good with meaningful things in my life. There's an ache that I think we're all invited to share, and that's the ache for global equity and sustainability. The 12% of us who live in the United States and Western Europe are responsible for 60% of global consumption. If everybody on the planet was to consume at the rate of the average American, it's estimated that it would take between 4 and 7 planets for all people to have to consume at the rate that we do. We only have one planet, okay? So what that means, so this is measured in terms of the acres required to generate the things that we consume. What I think this suggests is that, and it feels like this might be the invitation of the kingdom of God for you and I and others over the next 50 years of our lives, is to find a version of the good life that can be shared by most people on the planet rather than by just a few. Is this making sense to you? To find a way to live a flourishing life that is not as consumptive, not as aggressive in the use of natural resources. The world has changed dramatically just in the last 100 years after we figured out how to have these combustible engines and put oil into them. 1 barrel of oil produces the same amount of work as 25,000 man-hours. So we got used to a way of life that probably can only last a very short period of time. And so we're challenged to find new ways of living that are more sustainable. Now you might say, well, Jesus is going to come back. Right, but we don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or 100 years from now, and we're going to leave the planet here in a certain position for our children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and future generations. And a part of loving your neighbor is yourself. And loving the Creator is understanding how the whole system works. So, it's estimated that, well, let me just say this. I think sometimes it's easy for me to compare where I'm at financially to some of the people, the characters that I read and hear about around town. I have a new neighbor who's just lived in my neighborhood for a couple of years now. His name is Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know if you've heard of him. Some people know who he is. And I can easily compare where I'm at financially with this young guy who moved to my neighborhood. But let's instead think about me comparing myself to where I fit with the whole 7 billion people on the planet. 2.8 billion of us, our brothers and sisters across the world, live on $2 a day or less. If you've traveled a bit, you know about the struggle of living on $2 a day. Food costs the same in most of these places as it does here in the United States. And so think about if you had to feed a whole family on $2 a day or less and provide for everything that you need. Here's something that helps me put it in perspective. A person who makes $34,000 is in the top 1% of global wealth. Wow. So I know not everybody in this room makes $34,000. If you make $5,000, $10,000 less than that, you're still in like the top 5%. You could make almost half that and you'd be in the top 10% of global wealth. And some of us in this room make twice or 4 or 8 times as much as this amount. So it helps put it in perspective a bit. So I think that our culture trains us to see things from a sense of scarcity, but what does Jesus invite us into? We're all looking for security, asking this question, how can I survive? How can I thrive? And in the prayer that Jesus taught us, he said, live reliant on the Creator. Give us today our daily bread. So I want to suggest to you, Jesus invites us into a life of abundance, where we don't worry or strive or act out of greed. We can learn to be grateful, trusting, content, and generous. There's a good way for you to find to live. Whether you're a high-income person or a low-income person, there's a way that God has for you to live that's whole and good and that celebrates this abundance. So, I like to start this conversation about time and money, not on those things, but on something a bit deeper. What is it that matters most? And when I was starting to ask these questions as a college student, my dad sat me down and he said, Mark, before you think about your career, or you think about what kind of job you want, or who you're going to spend your life with, I think you should really ask the deeper questions like, who am I? Why am I here? And what is it that makes life meaningful? I was dating Lisa at the time, and so we spent some time doing a step that is the first step that we suggest in our book 3, and that is to name what matters most to you. When Lisa and I did this exercise, we did this in a notebook that we still have somewhere at our house, and we said, here's the 5 things that seem to matter most to us. One is to know and love God. Second, to nurture healthy family. We had a vision if we were to have, we would be a family together, we thought, and God might bless us with some children, so we wanted to see something beautiful happen with that picture. We wanted to offer hospitality and care, especially to those in suffering and struggle. We said we want to use our gifts to serve, and finally we wanted to live simply, gratefully, and creatively. So at the time, I was looking for some wisdom. How can I organize my life? And I got the sense, and I still believe it today, that if we are not intentional about how we learn to spend our time and money, the forces of a consumptive and materialistic culture will make most of our decisions for us. It's not like we have to think very much about this. We are in a climate that is driven by a sense of scarcity, greed, and self-protection. More, bigger, better is the mantra that drives the American economy. And I think that the invitation into the kingdom of God invites us into something bigger and better at that. So what does the gospel teach us about these things, about money and about our time? I started reviewing these things, and one thought that came to my mind was why it is important to think about what matters most and time and money together is how you spend your time is how you spend your life. I know that sounds obvious, but we say what's important to us by what we do with the hours of our day. And second, how you spend your life is shaped by your choices with money. The decisions we make in our financial lives either open up possibilities, they open up some possibilities, and they close down some other possibilities. So, Jesus said, in addition to what I already mentioned, Jesus said some very curious things about money and stuff. One thing he said was, a person's life does not consist in the abundance of their possessions. Life is more than what you own. I suspect that if Jesus was here tonight with us in the flesh, he might add something to this. He might say, a person's life also does not consist in the abundance of their consumptive experiences. A lot of us who are younger in this room kind of pat ourselves on the back and congratulate ourselves. I'm not as materialistic as my parents' generation. It's not like I want lots of stuff, you know. I don't even own a television. All right, that's how non-materialistic I am. I just watch all my shows on my computer, and that's somehow less materialistic. Or I don't want a big house in the suburbs someday. I just want a very expensive apartment in a very expensive city. That's my dream, and that's somehow less consumptive, materialistic. You get where I'm going with this? Even if we don't want stuff, especially for millennials, we want experiences, ink on our bodies, good taste in our mouths, travel to exotic places. A second thing Jesus said that you're probably well familiar with is, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink. Seek first God's kingdom. It's as if Jesus is saying here, when you get up in the morning, I don't want you to think about just getting by or what you have to do today. You're alive, and you get to walk with your Creator in this day and be part of what the Creator is doing in this world. So I want you to live from a high vision of life rather than just a focus on your material needs. This one really intrigued me. Later on in the letters of Paul's writing his young Padawan, his young apprentice, Timothy, and he says, Tim, if we have food and clothes, we'll be content with that. And in another place, Paul said, I've learned the secret of contentment. I can enjoy having a lot, and I'm also fine not having anything. Because I've learned to live with God in the present moment. And my sense of satisfaction isn't contingent on having a certain standard. I found this very fascinating. And I think about it a lot since then. I'm looking around the room, and I am noticing, well, first of all, there was some really great food. So there's no reason to be hungry right now. There's probably still some food back there. I'm looking around the room, and I'm noticing everybody has clothes on. So we got that. We can check that off the list, right? And if you're not quite warm enough, I'll go outside and I'll find you a sweatshirt. So our basic needs have been provided for at this moment, right? It means we can move on in our imagination to the things that God would invite us into. But imagine if you could live your whole life with that sense of gratitude and contentment. So, as young idealistic folks, Lisa and I decided to start an experiment we called our Radical Contentment Experiment. And it was sort of the seeds for this book, Free. In the book, we kind of polished them up and made them into 7 steps towards living in greater freedom and simplicity. But I want to share 6 things that we scratched in a notebook back in the early 90s that we said we're going to try and live by this. Now, as 19-year-old, some people are wont to do, it's great to be idealistic, and this was a great step for us. And we've now been trying to work out this experiment over the last, 25 and a half years together. Can you believe it? So I want to share a couple of things that we tried and some things that we noticed along the way. And maybe some of these things agree with things you've experienced and they're confirmation to you. Others of you, maybe you haven't considered these things and you want to jot them down and remember, maybe I could try that as part of an experiment. First is we said we want to be content and embrace voluntary limits to consumption. What if I started to live as if what I have right now is good? And I'm not going to spend my time thinking about more, bigger, better. The clothes on my back are good. The kind of housing I have is good. I'm not going to live a life where I think someday when I will be able to be happy because I will have achieved this amount of material comfort or been able to have this luxurious travel experience or whatever it might be. Well, something that we realized as soon as we started this is adopting a posture of contentment. Man, anything good that comes to you, you get to receive as a gift. There's some chips on the back table. I kind of like chips. And it's got, wow, I didn't expect it. I didn't need it, but it's nice to have that little, I saw some other people enjoying chips out there, okay? So it changes your posture about the things that you do have in your life. There may also be a reason to do this, not just for my soul posture, but also because of that stuff we looked at earlier about how we live on a small planet. And one thing I think about is even though I have the opportunity to make more and to spend more, what kind of example or expectation am I setting for our global sisters and brothers if I say, here's how, come be like me, this is what you need to be happy. There's over a billion people in China and around 1 billion people in India who are all paying attention to how we live here in the United States and thinking, that's what I want. And we're leading people down a path that is not sustainable for us or the planet. And that's partly why this voluntary limits might come into play as an act of gratefulness and abundance. Second, we said we want to live by a spending plan and if possible, avoid debt. So when I was a kid, my dad, I'm grateful, he taught me some things about handling money. When I was little, he would give me 3 dimes a week. Sounds like I grew up in the 1950s or something. This is in the 1970s. And he said 1 dime is to put in the offering plate at Sunday school. 1 dime is to put in your piggy bank for something you're saving towards, and 1 dime is to spend on whatever you want this week, Mark. And that kind of helped me to begin to see the uses for money. And he said, when I got a little older, he started giving me more money for the allowance. And he said, I will keep giving you this allowance, even if you get a paper route or something, if you'll keep a ledger. And so he gave me these green sheets, line sheets, and he said, I want you to learn how to pay attention to how God brings resources into your life and what you do with those resources. And if you can show me that ledger, I'm going to keep giving you allowance. Now, there were some months I got lazy and I didn't want to do it, but after a while I would get back into it because I wanted to get the more money. But it helped me to learn to pay attention to the details. I'm going to say a little bit more about this a little bit later in the talk. But Lisa and I, when we were married, we were low income. We didn't have health insurance. We did things that made babies, and the babies started coming along. And we had to pay for the birth and delivery of those children. Sometimes we had car insurance would come up, or we knew that there was a payment for something. And we learned to live within realistic boundaries about finances by paying attention to those things on paper. Now, I'll be honest with you, we didn't always like doing that, and sometimes it would have been more fun to woohoo, I feel like doing this, let's go for it. But what it helped us do is to begin to really have opportunity to trust God, because there were times where there wasn't enough. And when our first child was coming along, Lisa was wanting to be prepared. We knew that cloth diapers were a better way to go for the environment. And she's like, so I only have $12, Mark, or $18, and the diapers are going to cost $45. And we had learned over time, like maybe you have, when you have a need like that, you can ask God about it. And so she said, God, we got to get cloth diapers for the baby. We don't know how we're going to do it. Make a way. And Lisa went to the mall a few days later, expectantly, and saw that there was some diapers on sale for the exact amount that she already had. And living with that kind of attention to finances gives you the opportunity to ask for some things very specifically. When we moved to San Francisco, I can't tell you the whole story, but when we moved here, I thought there was no way we were ever going to be able to own property. And I told Lisa, we're going to expect to raise these 3 kids in a little apartment where they're all going to be bunched together in a room. We're not going to have a lot of space. And she said, well, I'm going to pray that God gives us, like part of our thing is hospitality. I'm going to pray that God gives us like a 2-unit Victorian. And I said, well, you can go ahead and pray that, but just be prepared to live in this little tiny apartment somewhere. Well, God was listening to her and not me. And the fuller story is in the book. So a third thing is we said we want to be resourceful and ecologically conscious. We want to value the things we have, take care of them, and know that there's a connection. We don't want things to go to landfills and all of that. Fourth, we said we want to make decisions about our time based on passion and purpose rather than a paycheck. And one of the great rewards to this is as we learn to take some of these other steps, when new opportunities would come, we didn't have to just say, well, how much does it pay? We could say, is this what we feel passionate to do? Even if it doesn't bring in the same amount of resource. And we had that opportunity. As I mentioned, gave us a chance to trust God and ask for what we need. And over again, perhaps like you've experienced, you can expect the unexpected. And God brings things to you in surprising ways. And finally, we said we want to live generously with our time and money. And this is not about being miserly. This is about living abundantly. And so we want to be free with giving away money and giving away time and giving away our lives, which has been fun for us to do. So I told you the experiment's been playing out over these years. Through a little bit of our wisdom and a little bit of luck and a lot of grace, we've been able to live here in San Francisco for almost 18 years, raise 3 kids here, without debts. Our house is paid for, and Lisa and I have shared one modest income. We live at the poverty level for San Francisco. And so I'm not making any promises or anything, but I think that as you learn to work with some of the principles of Scripture over time, you're going to see some good results in your life. And I know some of the older people in this room have experienced some of these things as well. So I like to describe this as an invitation to simplicity. Sometimes when people think of simplicity, there's a magazine called Simple Living, or Real Simple. And I don't know about you, but whenever I see that magazine, I go, it would really be costly for me to live with this kind of simplicity. Like to have all the appliances in our kitchen in matching olive green. You know that person in your life who's just cheap. It's not making them generous. They're not living in abundance. And that's not the kind of simplicity I'm talking about either. You're with me on this? So on a deeper soul level, simplicity is leveraging your time and money towards what matters most. You can do this if you have a lot of money, and you can do this if you have very little money. Simply making conscious choices to use your time and use your money to pursue those things that matter most. So what this is rooted in is that you and I were created for a life of flourishing. Jesus talked about this fruitfulness over and over in the Gospels, and in one place he says, here's what keeps human beings from being fruitful in the way that they were made. Worries, a pursuit of riches, and pleasures that can choke the plant and keep it from being fruitful. So some of us, our sole issue is that we worry about money and finances and getting by in the future. And that's the thing that we need to surrender to our Creator. Some of us have this longing, this misguided belief that more, bigger, better is what we need to find satisfaction. And others of us think, I need lots of pleasures in order to be happy, and more new experiences and tastes. And Jesus said, careful, because any of these things can take you off the path of holistic fruitfulness in your life. So it's been helpful for me to ask, what is it that's crowding out or keeping me from a flourishing life? And how do I want to be more free? So, in this room, all of us have things that we have already learned about living in the fruitfulness that the Creator desires for us, experiencing that freedom in our lives. I want to go through 5 different areas and just mention that these are dimensions to living in this kind of freedom. Okay, one is work and meaning. Some of us in this room, we have found work to do and ways to spend the hours of our lives that feel deeply meaningful to us. Is this a strength for anybody who's in this room? Raise your hand if this is a strength for you. All right, right on. And when I ask you to raise your hands, put them all the way up. Don't be like that, okay? Second, some of us, a strength is how we spend our time. We've learned to use our time in very conscious and careful ways to do what's most important. Anybody? Is this a strength for you? How you use your time? All the way up. Okay? Pay attention to these people, follow them around, and find out what their secret is. Okay? Because that seems like something that's a growth area for a lot of us in this room. For some of us, our strength is soul issues. We have learned to live in gratitude, contentment, and trust. We're not afraid. We're not worried. We're trusting in God with our lives. Anybody feel like that's a strength for you? Raise your hand. Right on. Awesome. For some of us, it's the details of money management. We've learned to be wise in how we use money. Anybody that a strength for? All right. Raise your hands high. Pay attention to those people. Talk to them afterwards tonight. Find out what they've learned. Okay? And finally, some of us have strength in this, oops, it disappeared, sorry about that. Global sustainability. We've learned to reduce, reuse, recycle, lower our footprint. Anybody feel like this is a strength for you? All right, right on. Those of us who live in San Francisco, we kind of get an easy pass on this in some ways because we have to compost and we have to recycle, right? We're getting encouraged to do that, okay? Makes it easy for us. So, here's something I've discovered, is that if you're strong in one area, sometimes it means that you have a real need for growth in another area. And this is a little blunt, but I've noticed these are 2 axes here. Some of us are really strong in vision and values. We're dreamers and idealists. We think about how we could live in the most meaningful way to seek God's kingdom and do good in this world. And oftentimes, people who are high in vision and values, they struggle a bit along this line, and that's skills and competencies about time management and money management. Anybody know what I'm talking about here? Yeah. All right. And so to thrive, it's great that you're high in vision and values. What you might need to pay attention to is I need to learn to handle my time and money more consciously and carefully. Now there's others of us, we've learned either through like personality, good training, family inheritance, to be really good at time and money stuff. We're good at those details. And sometimes somebody who's really good at paying attention to those details has a hard time thinking in visionary ways. A friend of mine put it to me like this. She said, I always make my job choices based on my level of experience and education and how much I think I should make. But I feel like maybe God might be inviting me in the future to make choices more that fit with my greater vision and values about the kingdom of God, rather than just what makes sense on paper. So we're each invited to take some new steps to grow, and the book Free will help you to do that. I want to mention just a couple extra things on one or two of these steps. This one seems to be one of the keys for a lot of us, is taking the chance to pay careful attention to what our spending is. But I want to share with you a way to do that that might be surprising to you a little bit, that we found have good results for people. So this doesn't tend to be one of the sexier topics we talk about among followers of God in the way of Jesus, personal budgeting and spending and things like that. But Jesus actually had some compelling things to say about it. He said, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough? Now, I know he was using that as an analogy for something else, but the principle still applies. But here in Luke 16, 10 and 11, he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? In other words, when we learn to handle the details of our finances wisely, it prepares us to handle the true riches of the currency of life in the kingdom of God. It's not one versus the other. The two go together. So we about 8 or 9 years ago, we started doing a practice that I still do every year that we've seen be deeply transformative for folks. And some of us here at YWAM have done this together. We get together and we talk about the details of our financial lives and ask each other some questions. Tell me about the spending plan you came up with. What's your financial goals? What were your thoughts and feelings and questions when you were coming up with that? Where do you recognize an opportunity to trust God? And how can we pray for you? Some of the most intimate experiences I've had in Christian community have come from sitting in a living room or another space with a group of people answering these questions together. Lots of crying, sometimes a little bit of laughing, because it really gets at a place of pain point where we have an opportunity to invite God into that pain and in a supportive environment, take new steps in our lives. I want to try and land the plane here. I'm going to have to skip ahead a little bit on this. I want to, as I finish the talk here, I want to dare you to believe 3 things. I find this to be very compelling. One is, I dare you to believe that you were made with a deeper purpose, to be a part of the healing and restoring work that our Creator desires in this world. And you have a unique role to play in that. Second, I dare you to believe that you have enough. At this moment, the resources are all the resources that are necessary for you to thrive are here for you. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to struggle in your life. It doesn't mean you're not going to experience pain. But you can trust that you have enough today, that you will have what you need tomorrow. And through all the ups and downs in the rest of your life, including suffering, sickness, and eventual death, none of those things can separate you from what is essential to life, which is relationship with the Creator of the universe. Sickness and death cannot even separate you from that. And you and I can learn to live in that abundance. And finally, you can use what you have and who you are to do good. But it's going to require some intentionality in managing the details of your life. You were created just a little lower than heavenly beings and crowned with glory and honor. You have intelligence, you have information, and God's inviting you to use those what you have intentionally to do good.